The day my stepfather's attorney called me a bitter, jealous child in open court, I was already wearing my badge under my jacket. Not metaphorically, literally, a gold IRS criminal investigation badge clipped to my belt, hidden under a blazer I'd bought specifically because it photographed well on the witness stand. My stepfather sat 12 feet away at the defense table in a charcoal suit. That probably cost more than my first car. When the prosecutor stood and said, "The government calls Special Agent Ivy Caldwell," I watched his jaw stop working mid-chew on his breath mint. My mother, sitting behind him in the gallery, made a sound I'd never heard from her before. Something between a gasp and a sob. My stepsister Becca grabbed the railing in front of her, like the floor was tilting. My stepfather just looked at me. For a long moment, nothing moved on his face at all. I'd waited 2 years and 4 months for that moment. "Let me tell you how we got there. My name is Ivy, and I grew up in the kind of house where money was the language. Everyone spoke fluently except me. My mother remarried when I was 14. His name is Gareth Holloway, and he was, by every visible measure, the kind of man mothers in our suburb of Nashville thanked God for. He ran a mid-sized construction and property development company. He coached youth soccer for 3 years when Becca was in middle school. He shook hands firmly, remembered your name, sent flowers when people had surgery. At our Thanksgiving table he sat at the head and carved the turkey like a man who'd earned every square inch of that house. I was his wife's kid from a previous marriage. I want to be clear about something. He wasn't cruel to me. He wasn't a monster in the obvious ways. He was something quieter and harder to name. Dismissive in a way that was always deniable. When I got a 94 on a chemistry exam, he asked what happened to the other 6 points. When I got into the University of Tennessee on a partial scholarship, he made a comment at dinner about how some kids just need more time to find their path. Not to me, exactly. To the table, in a way that included me without addressing me. I left for Knoxville at 18 with a used laptop, and the particular determination of someone who has something to prove to a person who will never admit they were worth proving anything to. I did well in college, not the kind of well that makes headlines. I wasn't valedictorian, I didn't cure anything, but I graduated in 3 years by overloading semesters and taking summer classes, and I walked across that stage at 21, with a degree in accounting and mathematics and a job offer already signed with the IRS. Not the customer service side. The Criminal Investigation Division, federal law enforcement, badges and firearms, and the authority to follow money wherever it went. Nobody in my family knew that last part. I'd taken the job offer quietly, completed the background investigation process quietly, graduated from the CI Training Academy in Georgia quietly. My mother knew I worked for the IRS. She pictured spreadsheets and audits. Gareth, the one time it came up, said, "At least it's steady work, with the particular brand of generosity that sounds like a compliment until you play it back later." For almost 2 years, I let them think that. It was easier, and eventually, it became useful. The first time I heard about Holloway Development's accounting irregularities, I wasn't even looking for them. It was a Tuesday afternoon in February, and I was cross-referencing contractor payment records on an unrelated case. A roofing company in Murfreesboro that had been inflating material costs on federally subsidized low-income housing projects. The name Holloway Development Group showed up in 3 subcontractor payment chains, nothing alarming on its face. But the payment dates were strange. Invoices marked as paid on dates that preceded the issuance of the invoices themselves. Small amounts. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't specifically trained to look for it. I flagged it to my supervisor, a woman named Agent Darlene Foss, who'd been with CI for 19 years and had the energy of someone running on black coffee and righteous indignation. "Is this a conflict?" she asked, reading the name. "It's my stepfather's company," I said. She looked at me over her reading glasses. "And you brought it to me instead of burying it." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "Pull everything you can that's publicly available. Don't go near anything proprietary yet. Give me what you find in a week." What I found in a week filled 43 pages. Holloway Development had been running a layered invoicing scheme for at least 7 years. The basic structure was this. Gareth would hire subcontractors, sometimes real, sometimes companies he'd quietly established himself, to complete work on commercial and residential projects. The subcontractors would bill for materials and labor at inflated rates. Those inflated payments were logged as legitimate business expenses, reducing the company's taxable income. The excess money cycled back through shell companies, showing up eventually as consulting fees, equipment rental, and in one particularly creative instance, as payments to a landscaping company that did not appear to own any landscaping equipment, and whose registered address was a UPS store in Brentwood. The UPS store address was what broke it open for me, because I'd been to that shopping center. I'd driven past it 100 times as a teenager. It was 2 blocks from the house where I grew up. I sat with that for a while. Darlene expanded the investigation and brought in 2 more agents. She also told me very directly, that I would be kept at arm's length from the operational core of the case, given the family connection, unless there was a specific reason to include me. I understood and agreed. The specific reason arrived 4 months later, at Easter dinner. I want to explain something about my mother before I go further. Her name is Vivian, and she is one of those women who holds everything together through sheer force of routine. The kind of person who makes her bed every morning even in crisis. Who sends birthday cards 2 weeks early. Who cries at commercials but never at funerals, because funerals are too real, and commercials are safe. She married Gareth when she was 37. She'd been a single parent for 3 years by then, working as a dental hygienist, splitting her attention between a job and a teenager and a mortgage that made her quiet sometimes at breakfast. Gareth was stable. He was present. He paid for things without making her feel small about needing help. She didn't know what he was. I have thought about this every day since the investigation began. My mother's signature appeared on the company's joint tax filings for 6 of the 7 years in question. She was technically a co-owner of Holloway Development Group. Gareth had added her to the LLC in the 3rd year of their marriage, which he'd presented as a gesture of partnership, of building something together. She signed where he told her to sign. She had no involvement in the company's operations. This distinction would matter enormously later. It mattered to me from the beginning. At Easter I arrived at the house in the late afternoon, when the kitchen smelled like ham and something with brown sugar, and everyone was already 1 glass of wine past pleasantries. Gareth's business partner, a man named Doug, who I'd met maybe 5 times over the years, was there with his wife. Becca and her boyfriend were there. My mother moved between the kitchen and the dining room, with the focused efficiency of someone orchestrating a production. Gareth found me in the backyard before dinner, where I'd gone to avoid Doug's opinions about interest rates. Ivy. He handed me a glass of white wine I hadn't asked for. "How's the agency treating you?" "Fine," I said. "You know, I've been thinking. We're bringing in a new internal accounting firm this year. Upgrading systems, tightening the compliance side of things." He paused. "Someone with your background could add real value to a company like ours. The work would be more interesting than government audits. More money, obviously." It was the same offer he'd made 2 years earlier, in almost exactly the same words. I'd declined politely that time. I wondered if he even remembered making it the first time, or if this was just something he said periodically, like asking if I wanted more turkey. "I'm settled where I am," I said. He nodded in the way people nod when they've already moved on. "Well, doors always open." That night, driving back to my apartment in East Nashville, I called Darlene. "He offered me a job again," I said. "Same terms as last time, same script, basically." A pause. "Do you think he suspects anything?" I thought about his face, the ease of it, the way he'd handed me the wine like dispensing a favor. "No," I said. "I think he's just someone who can't stop recruiting." "Okay." Another pause. "Ivy, your aunt reached out to our office today." I pulled over. My aunt, my mother's younger sister, Lorraine, had called the IRS tip line 2 days earlier and left a message that had been routed to Darlene's desk by circumstance or fate or whatever you want to call it. Lorraine had been handling some of my mother's personal financial paperwork as a favor: medical bills, insurance coordination after my mother had a minor procedure in the fall. In doing so, she'd come across account statements that didn't match what my mother had described about the family's finances. She didn't know what she was looking at. But she knew something was wrong. She'd called the IRS because she didn't know who else to call. I sat in my car on the side of I-440 for a long time. Lorraine and I met at a coffee shop in Germantown the following Saturday. She was there before me, both hands wrapped around a mug, not drinking. She looked like she hadn't slept well in several days. "I need to ask you something," she said before I'd even sat down, "and I need you to be straight with me." "Okay. Is your job, the IRS thing, is that more than just audits?" I looked at her for a moment. She had my mother's eyes and none of my mother's tendency to smooth things over. She'd always been the sister who asked the uncomfortable question out loud. "Why are you asking?" I said, carefully. "Because I've been up at 2 in the morning, 3 nights in a row looking at account transfers that make no sense. And I found Vivienne's name on documents she's never mentioned, and I don't know if I should call a lawyer or the police or what." She put her mug down. "And I know you work for the IRS, and I know you're smarter than everyone in that family gives you credit for, and I need to know if you already know something." The coffee shop felt very small. I asked her what she'd found. Over the next 40 minutes, she showed me photographs she'd taken on her phone, account statements, wire transfer records, a document with my mother's signature at the bottom, authorizing the transfer of $340,000 to a company called Greenfield Capital Partners, LLC, which neither Lorraine nor my mother had ever heard of. My mother had signed it 18 months ago along with a stack of other documents Gareth had put in front of her during a refinancing process. Greenfield Capital Partners LLC was one of the shell companies on our case file. "I can help," I said. "But Lorraine, I need you to understand what this means. What you've given me doesn't stay between us. She nodded slowly. I know, Vivienne is going to be devastated. Yes, is she in trouble? This was the question I'd been dreading. We don't believe so, but that's not something I can promise you right now. She was quiet for a moment, looking at her hands. Then she said, You know, I never understood why you took a government job. Gareth used to say it all the time, that you were wasting your potential. That you were too cautious, too risk-averse. He said it like it was obvious. She looked up at me. He talked about you a lot. Have you ever noticed that? People don't bother talking about someone they've dismissed. They just ignore them. I thought about that on the drive home. I thought about it for a long time after. I'll skip the parts that took the longest, because patience isn't what makes a story. Holloway Development Group had been operating its tax fraud scheme for 9 years. Not 7 as we'd initially estimated. The total amount of fraudulently deducted expenses, money that had been cycled out of the business and concealed from the IRS, came to just over $4.1 million across the full period. Gareth had used 17 separate subcontractor entities, 9 of which he'd created himself through a combination of family members' names and nominee owners. His bookkeeper, a man named Todd, who'd been with the company for 11 years, was a cooperating witness before we even formally approached him. He'd been uncomfortable with the arrangement for years, and had kept his own parallel records, as, in his words, insurance. Todd's parallel records were extraordinarily useful. The scheme had also extended into payroll fraud. Gareth had been paying ghost employees. Workers listed on the company payroll who didn't exist, or who had no idea their social security numbers were being used, and pocketing the associated payroll expenses as additional deductions. 3 of the ghost employees' SSNs belonged to former legitimate workers, who'd left the company years earlier. None of them knew their information was still being used. One of those former employees, a woman named Patrice who'd worked as an office manager for Holloway Development until 2019, had been audited by the IRS in 2022. Because of income discrepancies on her return, she'd spent 14 months and roughly $6,000 in accountant fees, resolving a tax liability that wasn't hers. She didn't know, until federal investigators contacted her, that the source of the problem had been her former employer's ghost payroll. She came to the courthouse the day Gareth was sentenced. She sat in the gallery without saying anything to anyone. When the judge read the sentence, 11 years, restitution of $4.1 million, forfeiture of the Brentwood property, she pressed her lips together and stared at the table in front of her for a moment. Then she picked up her purse and walked out. I watched her go through the glass panel of the courtroom door. She walked like someone who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just set it down. I thought about that walk for weeks afterward. The arrest happened on a Wednesday in October. Gareth was picked up at his office, not at home, which was a deliberate choice. My mother didn't find out until the agents went to the house to execute the search warrant. Lorraine was already there. We'd arranged that without telling my mother why, just asking Lorraine to stop by for coffee. Lorraine said later that my mother stood completely still in the kitchen when the agents arrived, and then sat down very carefully in a chair, and then asked, quietly, if she was under arrest too. She was not. The investigation had established with significant documentary support that her involvement was nominal. Her signatures existed, but her understanding of what she'd signed did not. She'd been used, deliberately, over years. I was not there that day. I was in a federal building downtown being prepared for the first of what would become 8 days of testimony. The defense attorney's approach was predictable and honestly competent. I had a personal motive. I'd resented Gareth since childhood. I was using federal resources to settle a family score. He used the phrase, a grievance that predates this investigation, 4 times in his opening cross-examination. I counted, because counting things helps me stay calm. What the defense couldn't address was Todd's parallel ledgers, Patrice's audit records, the 17 shell company registrations, the wire transfer timestamps, and the testimony of 2 bank officers who'd processed transactions they'd been told were standard business expenses. Gareth was convicted on 19 counts of tax fraud, 1 count of wire fraud, and 3 counts of payroll fraud involving misuse of social security numbers. My mother was granted immunity in exchange for her testimony and cooperation. She hadn't known. The investigation confirmed that early, but confirming it and watching her sit on the witness stand and hear her own signature read back to her in a federal courtroom were 2 very different things. She filed for divorce 6 weeks after the verdict. The hardest moment wasn't the testimony. It wasn't the verdict. It wasn't even watching Gareth's attorney try to turn 14 years of quiet dismissal into a motive that would stick with the jury. It was my mother. 3 days after the conviction, she called me at 8 in the morning, not to ask questions or to process what had happened. She'd been doing that with a therapist I knew. She called to say one thing. He told me, when we were dating, that you reminded him of someone difficult, she said. Her voice was careful, precise, the way she got when she was holding herself together. He never said who. I didn't ask. A pause. I should have asked. I didn't say anything for a moment. You couldn't have known, Mom. No, but I think I could have paid closer attention. Another pause, longer this time. I'm sorry, Ivy. I don't think I protected you the way I should have. I sat with the phone against my ear and looked out my apartment window at the courtyard below and thought about being 14 years old at a Thanksgiving table and what it felt like to take up less space on purpose. And I thought about how long I'd been doing that, and why, and what it had quietly made me good at. You didn't know what to protect me from, I said. Neither of us did. She cried a little after that. I let her. It seemed important not to rush it. Lorraine got coffee with me the week after the sentencing. She'd been the one who'd made the call to the tip line, the small decision that connected everything, and I don't think she'd fully processed what that meant for her. Are you okay? I asked. She thought about it seriously, the way she always did. I don't know yet, she said. I keep thinking about whether I did the right thing. I'd expected that question. I'd thought about what the right answer was supposed to sound like. Something clean and resolving. You did the necessary thing, I said. I've started to believe those are usually the same, even when it doesn't feel that way. She nodded into her coffee. He's going to be someone's ex-husband and someone's stepfather for the rest of his life, no matter how many years he serves. Yes, I said. That part doesn't go away. Does it help, knowing it's done? I thought about Patrice walking out of the courtroom. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone. I thought about the UPS store address 2 blocks from where I grew up, and the 14-year-old version of me who'd sat at a table and tried to take up less space, and hadn't known yet that the instinct to go quiet, to watch, to learn the shape of a room before she moved through it, that all of that was going to become, eventually, the thing she was best at. It helps in the way that real things help, I said. Not completely, not all at once, but yes. I'm a special agent, full credential, no asterisk. Darlene Foss is still my supervisor, and still the person I'd most want in my corner in any situation involving money, federal jurisdiction, or difficult conversations. I don't talk about the Holloway case much. What happened is public record now, and people who followed it can find the details. This is the first time I've put it together in full. If you take anything from this, I don't want it to be that I was exceptional. I wasn't. I was a 21-year-old who took a job nobody in her family took seriously and turned out to be good at it. And then one afternoon found a name on a document that she recognized and made a choice about what to do next. Everything after that was just the consequence of that one choice. The people who called me a disappointment weren't seeing something false. From the outside, I looked exactly like someone who had settled. Someone who'd aimed low and landed there comfortably. Someone safe to overlook. That's the thing about underestimating people. You never really know what someone is building in the quiet.